Okay, now we enter part three in this and the ending of this showing of Genesis, and that it had proto Indo European origins, or as we used to call them, Aryan type people. In your Bible, they'd be listed as Japheths, but I've got a video coming up where other people have realized that makes other connections too at the same time, like a duality situation. Let's just go ahead and get into this and finalize this idea and talk about what he's referring to here.
That they can be given control over animals and the like, as opposed to being there to do work for the gods, which is the message from the Babylonian myth. In effect, the role of
these Proto-Europeans had a lot of respect from other people. We don't see that so much in literature now, but they realized that these people had harnessed the power of animals, cows, all kinds of animals that are being domesticated for food and for crops and all of that type of thing. And then on top of that, they rode the horses, which gave rise to the ideas of like centaurs and things like that. So one can see that. And this idea that they were created in the image of God, this gives them the ability to talk to the animals and do all of these type of things. And it's swaying down through the Sumerians, and you can see the Babylonians have twisted it around just a little bit, saying that we were supposed to feed the gods. It's almost in a situation where the gods are dependent on the humans versus our modern belief where the humans are dependent on the gods. Let's continue.
the man has been switched, it is opposite. And this may be one of the things that made the religion popular in the region. And applying this thought that humans are the image of God, and it would mean that humans are, in a way, sacred. To kill someone must be punished with the killing of the person who did the killing. And this breaks the older mythologies around humans. Here, God cares about humans rather than the humans being created to care about the gods. But that isn't where our interest ends, as perhaps one of the most interesting things is the name used for man. When God created them, and that is the word used, them, more than one person, he doesn't specify a gender. The name used is called Adam. Not the proper name Adam, Adam, spelled the same way, but a generic term which literally means earthly, or what we would now view as human.
So like basically people from the dust of the earth. Dust is a light tan type color, and so you can see how this is made. And then also clay and its coloration and so on. So we're given that idea. Adam also is said to mean pale and blushing. So we know which people we're talking about here as opposed to anybody else on the planet. Just want to mention here that all the Bible stories are actually all Caucasian mythology. It's been written down through time. There aren't any Eskimos in that book. There aren't any Aborigines from Australia in that book. Orientals aren't in that book, and neither are the black people of sub-Saharan Africa. This is really only a myth that was made for these people. You can see it when you look through it. Let's continue.
Now, what is even more interesting is that this Adam is not gendered, and because the Adam was created in the image of God, this would infer that God was genderless. But in verse 27, there is some clarity when it states God creates Adam in both male and female. And so this could also be used to infer God was both genders, neither man nor woman, but both, represented in androgyny, or two people as one, a twin figure. And again, this is a direct link to the Proto-European creation myth and the primordial being. And with this, so ends chapter 1, Genesis. And chapter 2 begins and tells another creation story very different to chapter 1. And this is where man is created from earth, and the Garden of Eden is made, and man names all the animals, and again, cattle is specifically mentioned. And after this, God makes man, who he named with the names Adam, and then he took his rib to make another human woman, and now the rib could also infer that man is split in two. But in either way, the intention is to make woman Eve, as she would be known, to be equal to Adam. And this process of giving part of the body to create another is a theme in many other myths from Greece to Babylon, where from the forehead to the ear is given to make another human.
Now, that also shows that the Greeks are working off Indo European mythology. They were Aryans also. And this idea that the first beings were androgynous and then they were split to be the two separate things of yin and yang, basically, that there's a man and a woman and together they form one. This concept we still have today. But it's looked at in the mythology where it was an androgynous creature and then it splits. In fact, Adam was created as one and then split. So was Adam androgynous? Well, some people believe so. Other people believe that no, it was the male and they made the woman out of it and so on, like it directly says in the book that's here. But the idea that a woman grew from a rib and ate from a magic tree because the talking snake told her to is mythology, and hope you can understand that just hearing the phrase coming out of my mouth. But the reason they put ribs in it is because they're stealing the story basically from the Sumerians. And there's a story of Enki in the ancient times where he made these new sacred plants and everything, and he tried them out. Where he did, he got sick and he was going to die. And one of the things that were taken from him was a rib. And then in that same story, the lady, Ninti, is known as Lady of the Rib, and she helped birth these things. Then in another story later become the humans as they were created. And so they're really glossing over a large portion of the story when they do here. Just like whenever they have the idea of Utnapishtim in the Noah boat, they really leave out a whole lot of things, because if they had any of it in there, then you would know too much. But it's just enough of it, as Crecganford is saying here, for everybody that knew that story to relate to it. They'd be like, oh, okay, it's like this. It's the same thing, it's just like this. A redo, basically.
So, with that walkthrough of chapter 1 of Genesis, we've sort of touched on a few points which I'll summarise as the book starts, so Genesis here, without mythology of the battle between a god and Tiamat, the dragon, which allows the world to be created, but instead starts with the cosmos' water and Tihon. That is how the listeners at the time would have heard it.
And so whenever they hear this, they're like, oh yeah, I know about this dragon that created the world. And even to this day, we have this idea that two planets came together as they were primordially created, and that's how we stole the giant moon that we have, and only one of them, and so on. But when they say that the earth is null and void, and they call it tohu and bohu, that's cognate to Tehom, and that's Tiamat when you make it a female, because a lot of these dragons were females. You see, it's the female that's real protective over her stuff, so that's looked at as the way that was used. But let's just continue.
God uses the wind to calm Tihon, just as the Babylonian myth says Marduk uses wind to help Tiamat, and this will engage the audience into a story they think they know.
Also, there's an issue with when Marduk became the king of the gods. This is not where all gods are equal, but there was a major god that was over it, and he usurps the power of everybody and becomes this major one. Well, how is that passed down from people? Well, in the Greeks, they did the same thing with Zeus. You're all familiar with that, right? And how he was the king of the gods and so on. Well, they did the same thing in your Bible. And in the start, it talks about how they have this holy council, this Elohim that everybody knows is plural, and because that's describing everybody. But just like Marduk, he usurps the powers, and then he says, it's just me. In fact, he has to go out of his way a few times to say there's no one else but me. People use that like, well, they're all pagan and fake, but this one is really real. Well, it's just another retelling of the story. So what is real with it?
When the story changes to what was told, God just creates the world, leveraging the Egyptian myth, before creating man and going back to the primordial androgyny of a god who's both man and woman. But man...
So we have this idea that they've twisted these two stories together, and it's kind of odd, but when you're sitting in the middle of the Fertile Crescent, you have these people in the Sumerians, and they're going one way with it, and you have the Egyptians, and they're going another way with it, and then they took and put them together, and it's a strange thing whenever you read through it, and the discrepancies between the first story and the second story, and when they were created, and when this was created, and so on. It's a vast mistake. Well, what they're really trying to do is try to weave it all together, and yet in a modern day we can easily see through that and see the fact that they had one story from one people and a twist on it, and then one story from another people and a twist on it. And people say, well, that's so closely related, that's just like a retelling of it. And yes, all of these versions were retelling of it. In fact, the Sumerian tale was a retelling of things that have gone back way into prehistory. It looks like some at least 22,000 years. And the strange thing about Tiamat is it's found to be the earliest of tales talk about cattle and trying to domesticate cattle, and that's what that dragon is with the horns and so on, and it gets twisted. And again, I said in the other video that once they found all these dinosaur bones and stuff, they put two and two together, just like they did with things like griffins. I even watched a video where a guy was extremely steeped in knowledge just last night, and he was talking about it, but he goes, I don't understand the griffin, where it comes from, blah, 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 blah. And then later he mentions the fact of Leo the lion and the bird and so on, and he just couldn't put it together, or didn't put it together, or doesn't like the story of the idea that that's the cardinal points of the zodiac. And so it's written in the stars again. Here's this whole thing that's there. And again, all of these stories are coming out of proto Europeans. You know, we can see them with all their tattoos on them, and it's amazing how many mythical beasts, including griffins, are on their ancient tattoos. Let's just continue here and try to finish this off.
Man is treated as a being the image of God and not a slave of God. And so whilst we see huge hints that the creation of Genesis is based on the Babylonian creation story, and therefore the Proto-Indo-European creation myths at its root, there are further clues to substantiate the link. And because the myth that is the root of the story is so well known, the battle of the gods versus the dragon, for which order was created, and the world was formed using the body of the dragon, the Battle of Tiamat, or Tihom, as people referring it to here, is within the Old Testament. It is noted. So where is this battle? Are there hints elsewhere in the Old Testament on this missing battle to prove the evolution of the Babylonian myth? Well, there are. And
before we look at those, though, I just want to rehash again on the fact that even in the modern day, with all the science we have, we believe that these two planets crash together, and then we get the full moon that's on here. Strangely enough, there are inklings of a tale in ancient Sumerian, somewhat fragmented, but it talks about how that these dragons, Tohu and Bohu, had got together and created a fight, and they died. This is, of course, what ends up making the firmament and so on. The gods have to push up its ribs. And we're supposedly, like I showed in the last video, living in a snow globe type effect. And there's water above and water below. It says that in your Bible. Well, I think we went to space and realized there ain't no water up there. In fact, it is the ether. It is the void. It is the non-existence. But that tale still goes on. And in the ancient Sumerian tale, they had Kingu, which was the sidekick of Tiamat, and her second in charge and all of this type of thing. And whenever he gets killed in a battle, it says that his head forever looks upon Kia. Well, that'd also be Tiamat. And so if his head forever looks upon Kia, which is the earth, that's the man in the moon. I've shown this in a couple of other videos, but the man in the moon is forever looking upon earth. Yeah, it's only set to face one way. Let's just go on with this.
Exists in a few places. We'll start with Psalm 74, verses 13 to 17, which is talking about what God has achieved. And it says, You divided the sea with your strength, referring to creating a firmament. You shattered the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan and made him food for the folk living in the wilderness, showing that the killing of Tiamat and Apsu has been noted. It says you created rivers and streams such that they will never dry up. Yours is the day and also the night. You have established the light and the sun, and you have set all the borders of the earth, and you have made the summer and winter. And here, again referring to the creation of the world from killing the dragon, Tihom, and showing that things are now order, chaos. Although
So this is in Psalms. And people have looked through the Bible stories and they see, well, here's a sea monster type of thing. And they talk about behemoth, and everybody's tried to twist that around to a lot of different things. It could be something as subtle as cows, and it could be a rhinoceros too. That's looked at later as being a unicorn because he has that one big horn on him, and that's where unicorns came from. But I've got that already in other videos. Let's continue.
Psalm does refer to the monster as a him rather than a her, which is unusual, but originally the word deep is a male word. And this is a little odd, as chaos and dragons in mythology are often represented as female in form across the world. It is an inherent concept of man to think of these forms as being female. Not only Tiamat, who was but Medusa or Echidna, both half snake, half woman, or the harpies, half bird, half woman, or the sirens, the mermaid-esque creatures. Or on the other side of the world, there's Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, all female. But if you're not convinced with Psalms, then there's Isaiah 51, verses 9 and 10. And again, that refers to the mythology that Genesis has suppressed. When it says about God, was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces, who pierced that monster through? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made a road in the depths of the sea so that the redeemed might cross over? Here, Rahab comes from the Hebrew word Rahab, which means storm or arrogance, and was used to symbolise Egypt and its propensity to enslave Israelis, or Israel.
Which really never happened. Continue.
Right, and refers to the term as a monster, again inferring that suppressed battle from the Babylonian myth. But to me, in our quest to find links to the proto Indo European, it is Job 40 verses 15 to 24, and then Job 41, or Job 40 verses 25 onwards, depending on the translation of the Bible you're using. And it is this that provides the best clue, hidden in plain sight.
So, a lot of scholars have realized that Job was one of the earliest books in the Bible. It was one of the earliest things, and actually somewhat detached from all the other ones. There's ideologies and things in there that aren't really in the other ones, alluded to somewhat, or whenever you hear it, you get the allusion to it. But let's look at another place that's showing this Proto-Indo-European concept.
This passage has had much debate about it and what it really means. But to me, I support ideas that are similar to scholars such as Gunkel and Zimmern, as identifying the monsters in these passages as Tiamat and Kingu, and not whales or elephants as often suggested by some translations. And I'll read some of the verses of Job chapter 40 from verse 15 onwards. And these go, "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on the grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, and sinews of its thighs are close knit." Hidden here within plain sight is a huge clue as to who these monsters really were. It is hinted at subtly around the description of the belly and the tail. At the very first line, "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox."
Like a cow would. It eats grass. Later dragon mythologies are taken all the way to where they want virgin women and cattle and these things, and that's what they eat. which gets twisted into the idea of what God wants. But at this point here, back in the Bible, they're using a piece of the old Proto-Indo European myth, showing you that they well know it. The people that crafted this book were incredible. They were able to weave different stories together. In fact, it's taken us around 2,000 years to end up climbing up out of this hole, where we realized, well, that's just mythology too. And in fact, there are scholars like this man that are showing you where it all comes from, and where its origin really is created is in the ancient Proto-Indo-European people, and get passed down into Sumer, flanked off into India, but around the Fertile Crescent and into Egypt, and started theirs with their god Baka. And that's where you get the idea of the logos and the word, because just like today, voila, whenever magicians do something incredible. In fact, abracadabra is the idea that they can create like God did.
Could be saying, look at this monster. It feeds on grass like an ox. But if you put the pieces together, I actually see this reflecting the fact that was also hidden in the Enuma Elish until a newer version of Tablet 5 was found. A tablet that refers to Tiamat's udders and the other physical features that were cow-like. And so here it reinforces that Tiamat is in fact in some form a cow. The cow sacrificed by some of the Indo European creation myths to create the world. If we look at Job 41 or Job 40 verse 25 onwards, we see God is in effect flexing, saying how he beat Leviathan. And again, with the context of Job 40, this is referring to the battle that was in the Enuma Elish and the demythologized Genesis.
Now, a lot of people, a lot of impressive scholars have actually looked through this and go, yeah, here's another piece where they stole it from them, but they leave it at that point. Yet these people that went into depth in the ancient mythologies see that before that point, it was in Proto-Indo-Europeans, and they were the ones that brought the story to the other people and the concepts and everything. In your Bible, it's twisted just a little bit as he's talking about, and they try to demythologize things, but in doing so, people can look right through that. And he's telling you too that the people of the ancient times would supposedly recognize the story and then see that it's a new version of the story. Not something brand new all by itself, but something that was created out of what was already there, the mythologies of these ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans.
The first line goes, can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? So, in Job 40 and 41, God could well be reflecting on his battle with Tiamat and Kingu, and not only providing links to the connections of the mythology of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myths, but direct links further back. There was a purpose behind the first book of Genesis, in demythologizing Genesis, and that is to show the new God is uncontested and powerful and can create with just his word. The world he creates is still a bubble in water. The firmament is pushed up against the water above, and that equates with the meaning of the Hebrew word to be pushed up, firmament. And the ground pushes down on the water below. And this not only aligns with the Enuma Elish, but also allows God to flood the world easily by opening up holes in the firmament when he's angry for 40 days and 40 nights. The story.
So this was the Noah story and the idea of where all the rain comes from. And a lot of scholars, again, have looked at this and, oh yeah, there's vents supposedly in the sky up above the clouds that lets water in from space. That's not how that works. We know nowadays science works a little bit differently, but they had a concept back then, and that was brought about by the people who eventually figured out all of science. So why is something so archaic and mythologic held on by people? Well, whenever they developed the Bible by turning everybody else off effectively like a light switch, it only left one person here, and the people that are real prone to believing these things and passing them on felt like they had to have something. So that's why this new story that was written here, but also to give credit to a different people and not even the actual people that started this story, if you understand what I'm saying now. And where it all comes from. Well, it all comes from Proto-Indo Europeans' origins, the creation myth of the Bible itself, and much more of the stories that are entwined into it.
Story of the flood, where God decides to get a man to place two of all the world's animals on a boat that would have been smaller than the Titanic, and then drown all the men, women and children of the world who weren't in Noah's tribe.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange story, and even when I was a kid, I could read through that. I mean, we went to the zoo, and I started thinking about, well, if they were to cramp these guys for a year long, like they said, in this area, not even thinking about food yet, they would take a boat much bigger than they talked about, and that's just the things that are in the zoo, which I realized also none of the things that are in the zoo are local, they're all from around the world. But then this local flood idea that's listed in the Upanishad story that really devastated Sumeria and the Tigris and Euphrates got taken into over the hills and everybody. And people took this to heart and started talking about the floods. Well, we can see ancient flood stories around the world too. The only problem with that is that they correlate to different times and so on. And most of the people we look at were living around rivers, and rivers are prone to flooding every once in a while. And here we go. And most of those are a local flood too. But it's also where the Greeks get the idea of Deucalion and so on. And it's all from Proto-Indo European myths.
Such a great and powerful God. But the myth of the Enuma Elish was powerful. It had been told for hundreds of years and was so ingrained in the culture that whilst it was tried to be lost in the Old Testament, it couldn't be completely written out. Couldn't be completely written out of Genesis, and no one would listen to the story or recognise it without those hints there. I could go on now and talk about the Garden of Eden and the difference between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. Why the quest for knowledge was put in over the quest for immortality. How the apple wasn't an apple. How Eve didn't tempt Adam. But those stories can wait for another video if you want me to talk about those things. But for now...
And I've made other videos about each one of these things. Of course, if you take it back to the Proto-Indo European version of the myth, you can see what they were working with and created their stories out of it. From Sumer that comes before Egypt, to Egypt, the Fertile Crescent, and so on. And then those ancient Canaanites who had a similar story and Proto-Indo European roots and all of their stuff too, decided to write a new one. Well, when they wrote a new one, what did they do? They took that, in summary, and used it in a different way. Then tried to take a lot of the mythology out of it and say there were certain people that were doing it and it wasn't the gods, because they can't have any extra gods. See, they're slowly but surely turning it into monotheism, when it was really from something like a Marduk situation where there was a major god over a lot of other people. In fact, that's the same way that it's looked at nowadays, but everybody just says, oh, they're all angels. See, and there's only one that's standing up there. They did it to the point that they even disrespected God's wife, Asherah, which I've got other videos on. So it's self-exposing, but only if you get the stories from the Proto-Indo Europeans and the Sumerians and so on all around it. Like when I went to school, I studied that, not wanting to go against the Bible, and I was like, man, this sounds familiar. Man, this sounds familiar. Years later, after digging through it, I found another link and another link. And every once in a while, I'd come back and revisit again, or find somebody who's showing links that I didn't realize were there. And slowly but surely, it's just pretty much eat the whole thing up. like saying a goat's eating a book and eating all the paper up.
The Proto-European creation myth, with its primordial twin, the cow whose resources feed the world, and sacrifice who enabled the creation of the world, the making of man. These things endured the myths of this journey throughout the Indo-Iranian, the Sumerian, Babylonian cultures, and now we can see it is turned up in the Jewish and consequently all the Abrahamic religions. Their creation myth is based on a battle between twin monsters in a cosmos of water, with the main monster of chaos representing the cow which was sacrificed. But if that doesn't suggest to you that the Proto-European myth influenced the Jewish religion, then there are other pieces of information, such as the discovery of Zoroastrian images in ancient Jewish synagogues, or old Christian poems in Russia that hint at the Proto-European creation myth. And I'll talk about these in future videos, I'm sure.
He's got a few different videos on this, hitting it from different angles slightly. This is just one that I thought was able to show a summary in about 45 minutes worth of video here and show you its connections enough to where you might see it and then realize it.
But for now, come to the end of our journey, showing that Genesis is just a rehash of an ancient myth. And I hope you see how that creation myth of our ancestors, which started probably 8,000 years ago, spread to the Near East and has endured over thousands of years as it's evolved, never losing its key concepts.
And at the 8,000 year point that he's talking about, and it can be deviated to 12 and so on, this is when cattle introduced to this area that he's talking about, and they came along with a lot of things, a different way of looking at life, a different way of looking at things, and something that we turned into what we call religion today. Isn't that quite enlightening?
The consequence is that the Abrahamic religions have in their roots the Proto-European religion, the same religion that spawned other religions across Eurasia, from the Vikings to the Greeks to the Hindus. And with that, I want to say, I hope you enjoyed this video. You found some.
And I hope you've enjoyed the series here too. This is just, again, one of these verifier videos. And if you'd like to get deeper into it, go to Crecganford's site and look through his videos and see what he has to say. He's a real personable guy showing up here. And I want you to know, this man is not alone. He's one of hundreds of scholars that are going down this rabbit hole now and realizing this. Why haven't you heard about it before? Because it's all suppressed, because people want to believe that a woman grew from a rib and ate from a magic tree because a talking snake told her to. And those people were able to get past that point and go, ooh, what happened next? And you're like, woman grew from a rib, talking snake, come on now. By the way, that talking snake is a dragon too. I've got a whole series about dragons in the Bible and things so we can do that. But from Hindus all the way through the known world, and a lot of people realize that the Proto-Europeans are now the Western Europeans, and that Sanskrit writing all the way to ancient Celtic writings and ancient Irish and so on are all connected from a one common people. This also sounds like something out of the Bible with the Tower of Babel, and they all fractionated apart. Well, it's mythologies showing you what they thought of how this broke all down. But again, it's all Caucasian mythologies from way away from the Near East even now, and showing you where it originally came from. And it came with cattle, and it came with a new story, a new way of life. And it's so powerful. It lasted for thousands and thousands of years, took over these other religions, took them to another point, made them all have storm gods that ended up ruling it like Zeus and so on all the way through it. And they were left, whenever they stripped it away, to what you have now in the Bible. But you can also find ways that he's shown as a storm god and all these different things. But then again, he's supposed to have been twisted into a story that he's all things for everyone. Well, at least the Caucasians that developed this mythology in the first place. Thank you for staying with me and listening to this. If you got anything out of it, please put a comment down below. Maybe go back to the other videos and make sure you upvote it here and see if we can't get this around a little bit. I'm on to a next video showing you that the dating of the Old Testament is really not what it was. And it's going to take a few videos to do, but you notice along with my other videos coming out, there'll be a series off in here that is going to end up showing you that effect. Enjoy. Peace.